The living room was buzzing with laughter, chatter, and the sound of clinking dishes. Relatives moved in and out, their arms full of flowers, boxes, and wedding decorations. The entire house was glowing with preparations for the big day. It should have been a moment of joy for every member of the family, but for me, it wasn't. I stood quietly in the corner, watching my parents as they proudly discussed my brother's wedding arrangements with everyone around. Their faces lit up with pride each time his name was mentioned. Every detail was being planned down to perfection: what the bride would wear, how grand the hall would look, and which VIPs would be attending. The excitement was contagious, but I was left out of it all. I could hear relatives whispering, some of them stealing glances at me, shaking their heads, and smiling faintly as if they already knew what was about to happen. I tried to ignore it, but deep inside I felt the weight of their judgment. Then suddenly, my mother's voice cut through the noise, sharp and cold. "Listen," she said, turning toward me with a mocking smile. "On your brother's wedding day, it's better if you don't show up." The room went silent for a moment. Even the relatives stopped to listen, their eyes darting between me and my mother. My father added with a smirk, "Yes, don't embarrass us in front of the guests. You'll just ruin the atmosphere." The words stung deeper than any slap could. They didn't say it softly or privately. They announced it like it was a joke, as though I wasn't part of the family at all. My chest tightened, but I forced myself not to react. Some cousins chuckled under their breath. One of my uncles leaned toward another and whispered just loudly enough for me to hear, "It's true. He doesn't belong here. Always a failure." I felt the burn in my throat, the urge to answer back, to defend myself, but I didn't. My silence only seemed to encourage them more. My parents exchanged glances, proud of their own words, while others shook their heads and pretended not to notice the cruelty happening right in front of them. At that moment, I realized something important. Sometimes the deepest wounds aren't caused by strangers, they're caused by your own blood. But instead of shouting, I looked straight into my parents' eyes. I didn't lower my head, I didn't cry, I just stood tall and calm. "All right," I finally said in a steady voice. "If that's what you want, nothing more." No anger, no begging, just silence afterward. And in that silence, I saw a flicker of confusion cross their faces. They didn't expect calmness. They expected me to break, to argue, to plead, but I didn't give them that satisfaction. The room buzzed again, but this time the whispers were heavier. And as I walked out slowly, leaving the laughter and lights behind, a strange calmness settled inside me. They thought they had silenced me forever. What they didn't know was that this insult was the beginning of something much bigger. The following morning, the house was even louder, bursting with colors, voices, and activity. The fragrance of fresh flowers hung heavy in the air, mixing with the aroma of food being prepared in the kitchen. Every surface was covered with something: gift boxes wrapped in golden paper, silk fabrics draped over chairs, and trays stacked with jewelry waiting to be displayed at the ceremony. The front yard was alive with the sound of hammering as workers set up tents and decorations. Strings of fairy lights dangled from the roof, swaying slightly with the breeze. From outside, the house looked like a palace preparing for royalty. Inside, laughter echoed, songs played from the speakers, and every conversation circled around one name: my brother's. I stood near the staircase, half hidden in the shadows, quietly observing. The glow of the setting seemed to brighten everyone's faces but mine. My parents moved around like proud hosts, their heads held high, giving orders to the staff and receiving relatives with smiles. Every time my brother entered the room, a fresh wave of excitement swept through the guests. They clapped his back, praised his clothes, and admired his bride-to-be. No one noticed me, or perhaps they deliberately pretended I wasn't there. From the corner, I could see my cousins gathered in a circle, laughing loudly at some joke. One of them spotted me and nudged the other, whispering something. They both laughed harder, glancing at me like I was the punchline. I shifted my gaze to the elders. My uncles and aunts sat proudly in the living room, sipping tea and complimenting my parents. "You've raised such a fine son," one of them said, patting my brother's back. My mother's eyes sparkled with pride. My father's chest swelled with satisfaction. Not once did anyone mention me, not a single word. Not even a question about where I fit into this celebration. The feeling of being invisible pressed down on me heavier with every passing moment. As I leaned against the wall, I caught snippets of conversations. Everything will be grand, my father said. The hall, the food, the music, it has to be perfect. After all, people will remember this wedding for years. Yes, another relative chimed in. This family knows how to hold a wedding. You'll outshine everyone else in the community. They all nodded in agreement. The pride in their voices was unmistakable. It wasn't just about celebrating love. It was about status, image, and reputation. I couldn't help but think, was this why they were so ashamed of me? Because in their eyes, I didn't fit the picture-perfect image they wanted to display? As I stood there lost in thought, my brother walked past me, dressed in an expensive sherwani, his face glowing with the kind of confidence that comes from being everyone's favorite. He didn't even glance at me. Not a word. Not a smile. Just a cold shoulder as if I were a stranger in my own house. The music grew louder and the sound of laughter swelled again. Relatives danced in small circles, clapping to the beat. Some of the younger cousins filmed videos for social media, capturing the perfect wedding vibes. Every angle was being recorded, every smile exaggerated for the cameras. And yet, I was the one shadow no one wanted to capture. I turned my gaze to my parents again. My mother was fussing over flower arrangements, while my father checked his watch impatiently, making sure everything was on schedule. Their faces radiated joy, but when their eyes accidentally landed on me, the joy faded into irritation. Why are you standing here? My mother snapped quietly when no one was listening. Go upstairs. You don't need to be in the middle of things. Her words weren't loud this time, but they cut just as deep. I nodded without a word and slowly climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. From the top floor, I could still hear the sounds below, the laughter, the chatter, the songs, but they felt far away, like echoes from a world I didn't belong to. I stood by the window of my room, staring out at the decorated tents, the glowing lights, and the crowd of relatives who moved around like bees in a hive. They were all preparing for the happiest day of the family's life, and yet, in the middle of that joy, I was an outsider in my own home. It wasn't the decorations or the food or the music that I noticed the most. It was the absence of one simple thing: respect. From this quiet corner, watching everything unfold, I realized just how alone I truly was. And though my parents believed they had humiliated me, all they had done was plant the seed of something much bigger. Because weddings don't just reveal the beauty of family, they also reveal its cracks. And in this house, the cracks were wide open. The wedding day finally arrived. By sunrise, the house was already buzzing with energy. Servants rushed from one corner to another, carrying trays of sweets, fresh garlands, and gifts. The sound of doll echoed from outside, mixing with the laughter of relatives who had been waiting for this moment. I stood quietly in my room, wearing a simple suit I had saved for special occasions. It wasn't grand or expensive, but it was neat. For a moment, I looked at myself in the mirror and wondered if I could blend into the celebration without being noticed, or maybe, for once, be seen. As I walked downstairs, the scene felt almost unreal. My brother, dressed in a heavily embroidered sherwani, looked like the prince everyone had been praising for days. Relatives swarmed around him, showering blessings, taking pictures, and offering congratulations. I lingered near the staircase, trying not to get in the way. But my presence didn't go unnoticed. Why is he here? I overheard an aunt whisper to my mother, "You should keep him out of the photographs. It's your son's big day after all. You don't want people to talk." Her words were like venom, and though she spoke softly, I caught every syllable. My mother forced a smile and nodded, but when her eyes flickered to me, they were filled with sharp disapproval. "Go back to your room," she hissed under her breath when no one else was looking. "This is not your moment." I froze. "Ma," I whispered back, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I just wanted to be here for him, for you. I'm not trying to take the spotlight." Her expression hardened. "You've always been a burden, and today of all days, I won't let you embarrass us. Do you understand?" The words cut through me deeper than any knife. Before I could respond, my father approached. His face was stern, his tone sharper than steel. "Didn't we tell you already?" he said coldly. "On your brother's wedding day, it's better if you don't show up. People will talk. They'll ask questions we don't want to answer. You'll ruin everything." The room spun around me. My own parents, on the happiest day of our family, were ashamed to even acknowledge me. I looked at my brother, hoping for some kind of support, a word, a glance, anything. But he avoided my eyes, busy adjusting his cufflinks as if my existence was beneath him. The relatives, sensing the tension, fell silent for a moment before resuming their chatter. But I could feel their eyes on me, their whispers slicing through the air. I wanted to shout, to demand why I was treated like an outsider in my own home. But the words wouldn't come. My throat tightened, my chest burned, and my hands trembled. Instead, I turned slowly and walked away, each step heavier than the last. Behind me, the music picked up again, drowning my silence in a wave of celebration that had no space for me. Upstairs, I sat by the window, staring out at the decorated tents below. Guests continued to pour in, their laughter reaching me like distant echoes. Children ran around chasing each other, women adjusted their jewelry, and men clapped to the beat of the doll. The world was alive, but I was frozen in place. The pain wasn't just in their words, it was in their actions, in their refusal to let me exist as part of the family. It was the realization that no matter what I did, no matter how much I tried, I would never be enough for them. For the first time, tears welled in my eyes, not out of weakness, but out of a deep, crushing weight of betrayal. Parents are supposed to protect you, to lift you up when the world tries to pull you down. But mine had chosen to push me lower than anyone else ever could. The laughter from outside grew louder, and I could almost hear my father's voice boasting to the guests. My mother smiling proudly, my brother basking in the glory. They had everything they wanted. Everything. Except me. And maybe that was exactly how they wanted it. As the sun began to set and the wedding ceremony moved to the grand hall, I remained in the shadows of my room. My heart was heavy, but inside something else began to stir. A quiet resolve. Because humiliation doesn't just break a person, it shapes them. And though they thought they had silenced me, they had only planted the seed of something stronger. I wiped my tears, straightened my suit, and looked at my reflection once more. If they didn't want me at this wedding, then so be it. But the day would come when they would have no choice but to see me, not as a burden, not as a shame, but as someone they could never ignore again. And that day would be mine. The wedding hall shimmered with golden lights as the evening reached its peak. The bride's side had arrived, and the air buzzed with music, laughter, and the click of cameras. Guests crowded near the grand stage, eager to witness the union that everyone had been talking about for months. From the balcony above, I watched silently. My suit was plain compared to the designer outfit swirling below, but I wore it with quiet dignity. I had been pushed out, mocked, and humiliated, but I was still here. And though every instinct told me to disappear, something deeper inside refused. I could feel the eyes of certain relatives trailing up toward me, whispering to one another. To them, I was the unwanted shadow at the edge of the spotlight. But for the first time, I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. Instead, I leaned against the railing calmly, as if I belonged there just as much as anyone else. When the time came for the family photographs, the photographer's voice echoed, "Immediate family, please come to the stage." My heart tightened. I knew what was coming. Sure enough, my father stepped forward briskly and whispered something to the photographer. The man nodded awkwardly, then looked toward me. His hesitation was obvious. "Not him," my father said firmly. "Only us." The crowd stirred, sensing the unspoken insult. Some guests exchanged awkward glances. Others smirked knowingly. My mother avoided my gaze completely, adjusting her jewelry as though nothing had happened. I descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. The whispers grew louder, but I didn't rush. My calmness seemed to unsettle them more than anger ever could. "Beta," my father muttered when I approached, his tone carrying false patience. "We told you before. This isn't your place. Please don't make a scene." I looked at him steadily. "I'm not here to make a scene." My voice was soft, but it carried. Several nearby guests went silent, waiting to hear what I'd say next. "I'm just here to witness," I continued, "to stand quietly and see my brother's happiness. Nothing more." The simplicity of my words confused them. They expected me to argue, to lash out, to fight for a place in the photograph. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped aside, leaving the space open, my presence unthreatening yet undeniable. The photographer hesitated again, but my father gestured for him to continue. The pictures went on without me. my absence etched into every frame. Yet as the flashes lit up the stage, I noticed something unusual: the bride's family watching closely. The father of the bride, a dignified man with silver hair, frowned slightly. His eyes shifted from my proud parents to me, lingering on the contrast, the celebrated family versus the silent outcast. Whispers rippled again. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others curious. But I remained steady, neither retreating nor forcing myself forward. My calmness was a wall they couldn't breach. Later, during the dinner, I found myself near the back of the hall, where a few children were playing with balloons. I sat quietly, sipping water, while the rest of the family mingled with important guests. Then, unexpectedly, a relative approached. It was my cousin, one of the few who had always remained neutral. He sat beside me and muttered, "You don't look broken." I smiled faintly. Why should I? They're humiliating you in front of everyone. I know, I replied calmly. But humiliation doesn't last. Truth does, he stared at me, baffled by my composure. Perhaps he expected bitterness or anger, but my voice was steady, my eyes clear. And slowly I could sense a shift. The people around weren't laughing anymore. They were watching, curious, uncertain. Because silence, when held with dignity, is louder than any outburst. As the night progressed, the bride and groom took their places for the final rituals. The hall quieted down, the crowd gathering in anticipation. My parents sat proudly in the front row, their smiles radiant under the chandeliers. I remained at the back, a solitary figure in the shadows. But I didn't hide. My posture was upright, my gaze unwavering, and then, in that stillness, I realized something profound. I didn't need their approval to exist. I didn't need their invitation to belong. My worth wasn't defined by whether I was in the family, photograph, or left out of the celebration. Was more than the role they had assigned me, the burden, the failure, the one better left unseen. A calm strength began to bloom inside me, quiet but unshakable. For years I had tried to earn their love, their respect, their acceptance. Tonight, they had stripped me of it all in front of hundreds of people. But instead of leaving me broken, they had freed me. I was no longer the son desperate for recognition. I was the man who could stand alone. And as I walked slowly back toward the exit, I caught the bride's father watching me again. His gaze was sharp, thoughtful, like a man piecing together a puzzle. He leaned toward someone and whispered something, his expression unreadable. The seeds of doubt were being planted, not about me, but about the very people who thought they had silenced me. Because while they laughed in the glow of their own pride, they didn't realize the storm that was quietly gathering, and I was no longer afraid to let it break. The night had reached its grandest moment. The groom and bride sat on the decorated stage, guests lined up to offer blessings, and cameras flashed from every corner. My parents glowed with pride, standing tall beside my brother, shaking hands with businessmen, relatives, and community leaders. To everyone else, this was a picture of a perfect family. But in reality, a son stood pushed into the shadows, denied his place, erased from the frame. I remained near the exit, my silence like an invisible wall separating me from the rest of them. Yet, I noticed the same thing I had all evening, the father of the bride's constant, curious gaze. His eyes scanned me more than once, as though something about me didn't fit the story he'd been told. Finally, it happened. As the rituals concluded and the bride's family prepared to sign the ceremonial documents, the bride's father raised his hand. His voice was firm, carrying over the chatter. "Before we proceed," he said slowly, "there's something I must know." The hall quieted. All eyes turned toward him. My father stepped forward with a polite smile. "Of course," he said. "What is it?" The older man's gaze shifted, not to my father, not to my brother, but directly to me. "Who is he?" he asked, pointing toward where I stood in the shadows. "And why has he been left apart from his own family tonight?" The hall went still. Every whisper stopped. The weight of his question pressed down on everyone. My father froze, his smile faltering. He is our elder son," he admitted reluctantly, his tone heavy with shame. "But he has always been different. Not someone we want to place in front of guests." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The cruelty of his words echoed loudly, harsher than any insult before. The bride's father frowned deeply. Different? In what way? Silence. My mother lowered her head. My brother stared at the floor. No one dared answer, and in that moment, something inside me shifted. For years, I had let their words define me. Tonight, I would not. I stepped forward. Calmly. Slowly. My footsteps echoed in the silence, each one drawing the eyes of the crowd. When I reached the center, I looked straight into the bride's father's eyes and then, briefly, at my own parents. They're right, I said softly, but with a strength that carried. I am different. Different because while they were busy building their pride on appearances, I was building something real. The hall stirred. Murmurs began again. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a slim black folder. Its weight was light, but its contents heavy enough to shift the room. I handed it to the bride's father. Before you give your daughter's hand, sir, perhaps you should know the truth. He opened it slowly, scanning the documents inside. His expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief, then to stunned realization. These are company ownership papers, he said at last. His voice trembled slightly. This business, this empire, it belongs to you? Gasps erupted across the hall. Guests craned their necks, relatives whispered furiously, and even the photographer froze, his camera hanging in midair. I nodded calmly. Yes, for years I stayed silent, working quietly, building my own path. While they mocked me, I built. While they doubted me, I grew stronger, and now, everything they once wished they had control over belongs to me. The crowd erupted in shock. I turned slightly, my eyes locking on my parents. You told me not to show up tonight because I'd embarrass you. But look around. Who is embarrassed now? My words sliced through the hall like thunder. My mother's face paled. My father's proud posture collapsed. My brother, dressed like royalty, looked suddenly small. The bride's father closed the folder and straightened his shoulders. His voice rang with authority. If what I'm reading is true, then the greatest fortune in this room does not belong to the groom, but to the son you tried to hide. The silence that followed was deafening. People stared at me as though seeing me for the first time. No longer the outcast, no longer the failure. Tonight, the truth had changed everything. And as I stood tall in the center of the hall, calm and unshaken, the judgment of the crowd fell heavy, not on me, but on those who had tried to erase me. The twist had been revealed. The silent son was no longer invisible. He was undeniable. The silence in the wedding hall was crushing. Every guest, every relative, every eye was locked on me. The revelation had landed like thunder, and now the storm was about to break. My parents stood frozen near the stage, their faces pale, their pride shattered. My brother sat stiffly beside his bride, his forced smile trembling as the whispers around him grew louder, sharper, impossible to ignore. The bride's father still held the folder in his hands, his expression hard as steel. He turned toward my father. You told me your elder son was a shame, he said firmly, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. But from where I stand, it looks like he's the only one who carries true honor. Gasps erupted. Relatives exchanged shocked looks, some even covering their mouths. The whispers turned into open voices. Did you hear that? He's the real owner. They tried to hide him? Their own son? What kind of parents do that? The weight of public judgment crashed down on my parents like a tidal wave. My mother's eyes darted nervously around the hall, searching for support, but there was none. My father clenched his fists, his lips pressed tight, but his silence screamed louder than words. One of the uncles, who earlier had mocked me, stepped forward now. His voice was laced with shame. All these years, we thought you were nothing. But you proved everyone wrong. Forgive me. I was blind. His words struck like arrows, not at me, but at the ones who had tried to bury me. Because now, one by one, the people in the hall began to shift. The tide was turning. Another guest murmured, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "Imagine a family so proud of appearances that they couldn't see the diamond in their own house." The whispers grew into waves of condemnation. People who had once looked down on me now looked at my parents with disgust. Their faces, once glowing with pride, were now masks of humiliation. My brother tried to rise, to defend the crumbling image, but his bride's father stopped him with a raised hand. "Sit down," he ordered sharply. "This wedding isn't about parading lies. It's about building trust. And I trust him, he pointed at me, far more than the parents who tried to hide him. The hall erupted again, some in shock, others in approval. The bride herself turned to look at me, her expression curious, almost respectful. Her glance toward my brother, however, was different, tinged with doubt, even regret. I stood silently in the center of it all, not raising my voice, not gloating. My calmness only made the judgment harsher. Because the crowd could see, I didn't need to defend myself. The truth was already defending me. One relative finally said what everyone was thinking. Parents who mock their own child in front of the world don't deserve respect. They've shamed themselves tonight. That was it, the final blow. My parents' heads dropped. Their shoulders sagged under the invisible weight of 1,000 eyes. The pride they had carried like armor all their lives had cracked, leaving them exposed, vulnerable, humiliated. The judgment was complete. The hall had chosen its side, and it wasn't theirs. Even the photographer, who had earlier been instructed to leave me out, now lifted his camera again, this time pointing it directly at me. The flash lit up my face as though marking this moment in history, the rise of the forgotten son. The whispers softened into a strange, heavy silence. But it was no longer hostile. It was respectful, curious, awestruck, and as I stood tall under the chandeliers, I knew one truth with absolute clarity. The people who had once laughed at me, doubted me, erased me, were now my witnesses, not to my shame, but to my rise. The hall was silent, but it wasn't the silence of ignorance anymore. It was the silence of judgment, of truth settling into every corner like smoke that couldn't be escaped. My parents stood like statues near the stage, pale and powerless. My father's shoulders, once broad with pride, seemed to shrink under the stares of hundreds. My mother's jeweled hands trembled, unable to adjust her bangles like she usually did to mask discomfort. I turned toward them, my footsteps deliberate, echoing against the marble floor. The crowd parted quietly, their eyes fixed on me. Each step felt like a trial, every witness waiting for the final verdict. When I finally stood before my parents, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My calmness cut sharper than any scream could. "You told me not to show up," I said, my voice steady. "You said I would embarrass you." I paused, letting the words hang heavy in the air. "But tonight you didn't just embarrass me. You embarrassed yourselves." Gasps rippled through the hall again. Some nodded, some whispered, but all waited for more. "You mocked me," I continued, "because I didn't fit the image you wanted the world to see. You tried to erase me, hide me like a stain on your perfect picture. But what you never understood is that strength doesn't need approval. Success doesn't need applause. And truth." I looked slowly around the room, meeting the eyes of every witness. Truth doesn't stay hidden forever. The crowd shifted, murmurs rising. I could feel the weight of their agreement. My father opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. My mother's eyes glistened, not with love, but with fear. Fear of the respect slipping away forever. I stepped back, turning to the audience. "To everyone here, let this night remind you, never judge someone by what they wear, where they sit, or how silent they are. Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the loudest truth." The hall erupted, not in noise, but in the collective shift of hearts. The relatives who had once mocked me lowered their eyes in shame. The children who had laughed earlier now watched me with awe. Even the bride's family sat straighter, their respect visible in their gaze. Then, turning once more to my parents, I spoke the words that sealed the night. "I may be your son by blood, but respect. Respect is earned. And tonight, I don't owe you anything. You owe me." My father's face fell. My mother clasped her hands together as though searching for forgiveness that would not come. My brother sat frozen beside his bride, his crown of pride shattered beyond repair. The hall had already chosen its side. And for the first time in my life, so had I. I straightened my suit, calm and composed, and began walking toward the exit. Each step was lighter than the last. The whispers followed me, but they no longer carried judgment. They carried admiration. At the door, I paused. Slowly, I turned back and let my final words cut through the heavy air. Remember this. The person you ignore today might be the one you cannot ignore tomorrow. And with that, I walked out. The chandeliers sparkled above. The music that once drowned me out now felt distant. meaningless. Outside, the cool night air hit my face, fresh and freeing. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of their insults. I was carrying the strength of my own truth. Behind me, the wedding continued, but its glow was gone. The guests didn't look at my parents with admiration anymore. They looked with pity, and nothing could erase what they had witnessed. The forgotten son had become unforgettable. Moral of the story: never judge someone by appearance or silence. The world has a way of flipping the script, and the one you mock today may become the one you respect tomorrow.